situation, and we hope for some things that didn't happen, and guys could have come on quicker. And obviously, we can get Nene back and Chris and Gerald, and then our depth is pretty good. We've got everybody a little bit out of, a couple rungs up.
That was Rockets head coach Mike D'Antoni answering a question on the team's depth. Why was he asked that question? Well, the bench got outscored by 36 points last night. Just to give you a little example, we were talking about the top of the show about the Clippers' depth. Well, the Rockets bench is last in scoring at fewer than 26 points per game. That's less than half of what the Clippers, who are the top bench team, score on average. So, Brian, I know you talked to Daryl Morey. I was texting with him, too, the other day, and he said, just give us time. We're working on it. December 15th is when a lot of players get freed up and have the ability to be traded. But how do you fix this if you're him?
Two things have happened. One, their owner just pulled back a little bit on spending. He was spending a lot of money. I'm not going to blame an owner for not going deeper into the tax, but that's what happened. Mm-hmm. They let a couple of key guys go. Second, they got 3 guys out right now. Nene hasn't played all year, which Nene gets hurt. Chris Paul has been injured a lot of the year, and Gerald Green is out. And Carmelo Anthony, who they were hoping was going to be a factor, is gone. So that's 4 guys who they don't have that they thought they were going to have. Then the guys that they did bring in, James Ennis, Michael Carter-Williams, Marquise Chris, Brandon Knight, none of those guys are stepping forward.
Go back to what do you do now? Because Chris Paul, by the way, who I think is a great leader of that team, is always going to be hurt some of the time because of the way he plays.
For Jimmy Butler is what you do.
Didn't work though. So what do you do now?
But I think there's two ways that they're going to improve. One, in the buyout market, but that's not going to happen until later. And secondly, they're going to need one of these guys that they signed, Ennis, Carter Williams, whoever. One of those guys needs to be able to, because remember last year they got Gerald Green mid-season, and all of a sudden that made a big difference for them. They need something like that to happen.
See, my thing is with the Rockets, it's always a problem. First, we were talking about their defense, right? Now the problem is their depth. And when I look at the depth issue, not only with Nene coming back soon, that should help a little bit at least with Capella, and especially on defense and finishing. But to me, I feel like the Rockets, they just need to understand that, okay, when Chris Paul is out or James Harden is out, Eric Gordon has to start, and that's number one, your boost off the bench. He gives you about 16 points per game, so not only are they missing key factors, but if they stay healthy, maybe you get Gordon back in a position that where your team is not playing well, first half, second half, this guy can come in and give you a deliverable boost. Now, health is going to be the best boost, but right now, Eric Gordon has been the signature bencher, but he's had to step into a different role as a starter, so things have been so-so.
It's just tough because, again, we've been talking about this a few times over the course of the week. You want Chris Paul on your team. It's not like you don't want him on your team, and he really is what powered them through the Western Conference Finals, and obviously when he went out, that hurt them so much. You just have to understand that at this point in his career, because he has pushed his body so hard for so long, he is going to miss gaps in your season, and you have to have a plan for when that happens. It can't just be like, well, Chris Paul is out. Chris Paul is going to be out sometimes. This is going to happen.
It is interesting, though, isn't it, that the Clippers' depth is the best? A lot of them are former Rockets players that they traded for Chris Paul.
Which was still a trade I would have made. I just think that you have to then be willing to shore up. And what you pointed about the ownership and the money, and I don't spend anyone else's money, but when you trade for Chris Paul, you are making a commitment to pay him the way they had to. And then you have to be willing to make the
What was the first thing that happened
commitment.
After he traded for Chris Paul?
An ownership trade.
An owner put the
An
team
ownership
for sale.
trade. Hey, what do you know? You mentioned Carmelo Anthony as well. We, of course, have followed his season where he started his Rocket. He's still technically a Rocket, by the way. He's just no longer with the team. And some of that Black Ops video.
Where's the hoodie?
Showing up. I know, no hoodie.
We're
I'm a little disappointed in that.
He means
shared
business.
like a bat where he was like batting over and all of that stuff. Obviously, any IG video is going to be good IG video.
True.
Everyone's amazing in their IG video.
No misses
What do you
ever.
expect from him for the rest of the season? Is he going to land somewhere?
So I was a glass half full with Carmelo Anthony. He gave you 16 points per game with OKC. He came to the Rockets. I was a believer in all of that. He especially took the role of coming off the bench. Now, I think this has showed us that whole experiment in Houston, that his role has to change. If there's value for Tony Parker or Vince Carter, and I know Jason Terry just retired as a broadcaster now, there's still value for a guy who can give you double-digit figures. But now I think it's his role in the locker room, his leadership, that's where he has to rely upon. It's not necessarily winning a championship with a contender. It's more so now, fading out in a most positive way, especially for your legacy.
There are executives who I've talked to who just loathe Carmelo's defense, who will say he's played his last game in the NBA. I don't believe that because I see things change all the time, and I do think he still has some skills that can contribute. But he is going to be hard-pressed to find a team. There's going to have to be a series of events that happen, whether there's an injury or there's a trade or something happens. But
May I be very blunt?
Yes, please.
please do.
There are a handful of teams in this league who are not trying to win right now. I know nobody's allowed to talk about that out loud, but winning is not the primary goal. It is player development, right? That kind of thing. And I understand that you then wouldn't want to bring in a player who you'd want to play a lot. You want to get those young guys to play. But a guy who is, by the way, he has been good in the locker rooms he's been in. His teammates like him. He was a class act in New York when, by the way, a lot of people would not have been if they had been thrust into that situation. He was a class act walking out the door in Oklahoma City. He hasn't gone out and trashed the Rockets, even though he was in some ways blamed for problems that were not his fault. If I am a team who, again, let me put this delicately, whose primary objective may have more to do with what's going on at Duke right now than with winning basketball games, that's a team that I would consider bringing Carmelo in for, because I think he does have a lot to teach your young guys, and you can let him play, and the fans would love him. He's a fan favorite, and he might not hurt your chances
like what Vince
with
Carter,
what you are going for.
Like what Vince Carter is doing in Atlanta right now. And I feel like 3-4 years from now, when the Hawks are rising again, they'll be like, I learned that from Vince. I learned that from Vince.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
That's value.
Right. Yeah. That is also.
It's one of the things that the Sixers didn't value during the process, was having a guy like that.
Right. It makes a difference. All right. Earlier this week, during a commercial break on The Jump, we were having a little conversation about Luka Doncic, and Byron Scott was telling Paul Pierce he was confident that Doncic's NBA transition would be just fine because he was using his personal experience with Peja Stojakovic. It was so good, we have to give you a little hot mics. This is what happened during the break.
Funny, when I was over there, I played Peja. He was over there, right? We were in the same league, and we ended up beating him in the finals. But he came to me and he asked me, he said, should I go to the NBA? I said, hell yeah. I said, listen, you want to go against the best. You're already best over here. I said, you can always come back here.
Right.
I said, but you want to play over there. So he comes to the league, and he said, coach, because I ended up being Sacramento assistant.
Right.
He's like, this is easy. Y'all only practice once a day. We had to go 2 a day, which is true. So this kid, at 19 years old, his IQ, his basketball IQ and everything accelerated. Because, they're going twice a day since he was 13 years old.
He played in Europe, right? Is he just on a different level than the rest of the rookie class because of all that experience?
Well, Luka Doncic is absolutely being the best advertisement for the EuroLeague ever. And I talked to Dwight Powell, my friend from Stanford. He plays for the Dallas Mavericks. And I was like, what do you see as the value of Luka, especially at this young age? And he said, okay, you guys care about the scoring. He's scoring almost his age, 19 and 20. But what we see is that this comes from a competitive nature. Mm-hmm. He was young on a big stage, and then he blossomed to a, EuroLeague MVP, the youngest ever, EuroLeague champion, and that's because it all relies upon experience. And it's also funny because we look at all the highlights, like what he did to James Harden, especially when he was guarding him. And to me, we see the highlights, but Dwight was like, what you guys don't see is the rookie adjustment. He's a guy that comes into huddles and is asking questions. And think about his ceiling when he's fully adjusted. We've gotten a good, nice little early taste.
So a couple of things. First off, it's hard for me to believe he's 19, not because he's good, but just I've been hearing about him for 3 years.
Yes.
Secondly,
Zion Williamson is going to be 40 by the time he's drafted. We've been hearing about him for so long.
The thing about Europe is they only usually play 2 games a week, so there's a lot more time to practice.
Apparently, according to Peja Stojakovic.
The other thing is, one of the things that European players historically have had issues with when they come to the NBA is the physicality.
And the speed.
Right. But where the league is now with the rules, there is less physicality than there's been any time in recent memory.
True.
Now, even if they were allowed to grab and hold, I'm not saying that Luka wouldn't still be a really good player, but he has come in a beautiful time where he doesn't have to deal with as much physicality as those before him. So it's just all lining up, and he's off to a tremendous start. And I don't know if this is going to pave the way for more Europeans because to be impact players immediately because he is such
he is a unique
black
case.
swan.
Yeah.
But certainly the moment on draft night where they made that trade.
We were together. We talked about it.
It could be one of the most important draft night decisions because the Tatum Fultz deal happened a couple of days before. But in the fire on draft night.
A couple years. Yeah. Oh, you mean?
A couple days. I'm sorry.
Before that draft.
A couple days
yes.
before the
that draft. Yeah.
Draft night could be one of the most important draft night decisions in a generation. the way it could affect those two teams.
Well, we were doing a show. I don't know if you remember, but we spent 5 hours on
I
TV
learned
together
how to
during
pronounce
that night.
Doncic
That's
that
right.
night.
That was a little tough. Through the 5 hours, Brian really grew on that front.
You
and
never
I'm
left
certainly-
your chair for
I did
5
not.
hours.
I did not. And
I was tuned in.
in my glass house, I am not anyone to criticize on pronouncing names. But I will say it's interesting. We talked a lot that night about how Doncic, to us, this guy was the MVP of the EuroLeague playing with grown men. It seemed a no-brainer that he wouldn't be evaluated higher than he was.
True.
And it seemed the fear of what if he failed was more scary to general managers than the hope of if he succeeded because of the stigma
You're exactly
of
right.
European
It-
players.
It took a GM who had capital with his organization. And then Atlanta, Travis Schlenk didn't have that capital. Now, he might have thought that Trae Young was better anyway, but
And look, we always have to remind people with the Trae Young, Luka Doncic trade, it's the opposite, right? So with the Tatum-Fultz trade, in essence, which is what that was, then Danny also committed some highway robbery because he got the pick. He got the pick in the Tatum for Fultz swap. In the Doncic-Trae Young swap, Atlanta got the pick. So
which is
even
getting
if,
worse every day.
Well, yes, but even if you say, hey, that's an uneven trade,
You're right.
Atlanta has a little bit more on their pile. That being said, I mean, look, we love this kid all the way through draft season. I was shocked he didn't go higher, and I think he is proving to people that sometimes it's the chance you take as opposed to the chance you're
And it's
afraid
the
of.
opportunity you get.
That
Trae
can be a
Young,
reward.
all
And the
of
general
them.
manager, and that's not against DeAndre Ayton, who I think is going to be a great player. I
True.
really do. But the general manager who made that decision at number one doesn't have his job anymore, which is a whole other issue. Coming up, the Wolves defense has been elite since the Jimmy Butler trade. Shout out Robert Covington. We'll talk about what's gotten into them. But first, our second distant replay from this date in 2002. To the B, Mr. Kobe Bryant.